Thank you, everyone, for joining me for these live internet studies week after week. We are coming out of basically a big long break. It was a week-long break because of the 4th of July weekend that I decided not to have class for. So I'm doing this recording. At the time of this recording, it's July 13th, but you're probably not going to be watching this video for another few days. Nevertheless, we are still working our way through the same topics that we have always done. This is kind of an ongoing study, long-form teaching, as it were, not one-off videos, 20 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 10 minutes here, 30 seconds here. It doesn't work like that for me. You got to kind of hang with me for the long term if you want to follow along with what I'm teaching. There are 2 segments to every hour-and-a-half long study. Very briefly, the first segment is eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. We talk about rapture, Book of Daniel, Yeshua's Olivet Discourses, Book of Revelation, things like that. The second 30-minute segment is entitled A Trinitarian Response to Biblical Unitarianism, and this is an apologetic section where we deal with Trinity issues versus non-Trinity issues. If you like both of those topics, stick around for the entire show. All right, let's jump into the first segment, eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. Let me turn real quick to these views of the rapture that I'm going to be discussing. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Basically, when we're looking at the historic premillennial perspective of end times, we're talking about a second coming of Yeshua that will lead into a 1,000-year millennial time period. The second coming of Yeshua is often termed either just that second coming or rapture. And in those discussions, there are 4 main views. Some people say there's 3 main views, but those are people who have never, I think, heard of the Prewrath view when they just say 3. And the 3 main views that are normally talked about are pre-tribulationism, mid-tribulationism, and post-tribulationism. Those are the kind of the classic 3 views of the rapture. But if you've never heard of it, there is in fact a 4th view that makes a very strong case. It's the view that I hold to. It's called pre-wrath rapture. So here's what they basically look like. We have a pre-trib rapture. I'm highlighting it right here on my screen right now. And this particular view says that there will be a rapture right at the very beginning of this time frame that's singled out as a 7-year tribulation. From their perspective, there will be tribulation and wrath for 7 years. And since there are verses that indicate that the church should not experience God's wrath, the pre-trib rapture places the rapture in front of that 7-year time frame. By comparison, they place their second coming at the very end of that 7-year period. And so for them, it's quite simple. The rapture happens before the 7 years. The second coming for Israel happens at the end of the 7 years, and everything's fine. All right, next slide is the mid-trib rapture. As we can see, let me just highlight this part first. In the mid-trib rapture, they have a rapture that happens right in the middle of that 7-year time frame that they call the tribulation period. And this would be the rescue of God's people from planet Earth taken to heaven. That's the classic perspective when we say mid-trib rapture. They place their second coming at the very end of the 7 years, just like the pre-tribbers do. And for the most part, these 2 views have a lot in common with each other. These 2, the mid-trib and the pre-trib, there's a lot of what we could say dispensationalism driving what they both believe, things like that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on tonight, so don't worry if you're not quite following along. The third view that I want to talk about is the post-trib view. So let's just highlight that also. The post-trib rapture has their rapture and their second coming both at the very end of that 7-year time frame. That, again, according to this chart, they also believe that there should be a 7-year time frame that's still yet future, but it will contain many significant events inside of it, not to, namely, for instance, tribulation will be happening, great tribulation will happen, the rise of Antichrist, things like that. So for the post-tribbers, it's very simplified by looking at verses that talk about Jesus returning, yet bringing in the kingdom seems to all coincide with an event that's timed at the very end of the week. I mean, honestly, when I look at the post-tribbers and compare them to the pre-tribbers, and they are diametrically opposed when it comes to where the rapture is, it sometimes makes me wonder, are they both reading the same Bible? Because these views are so opposite one another. And the only conclusion that I can begin to formulate as to why they come to two such opposing views is similar to what the late Dr. Heiser mentioned, and that is end-time prophecy is notoriously ambiguous in some places, to where it can go both one way or the other, where it seems to be purposefully ambiguous, and that causes us to wonder, did Yeshua want us to understand it all? Why is there so much equivocation or ambiguity? Or I rather would like to say it's kind of information limitation, meaning not all of the details show up. There's just enough for us to be prepared for his coming, but then when it comes to the finer points, sometimes there seems to be nuance. We can go either way, and that's why we have these big gaps in, well, we believe he's coming way before the 7 years. Oh no, we believe he's coming at the very end of the 7 years. And how can they both be reading the same Bible? It blows my mind sometimes. Okay, that last view is called the Prewrath Rapture view. So let's do like I did. I'll just highlight this too, like I did with all the others. This particular view is new to some of you. I won't spend too much time giving you all the details. I will do an entire show explaining this one more time because I think some of you still are not understanding what this view is, and you're either confusing it with mid-trib or you're just dismissing it as a Johnny-come-lately suggestion, not realizing that it has some teeth to it if you give it a careful reading. Nevertheless, Prewrath Rapture says that the rapture takes place sometime after the midpoint of the week and after the Great Tribulation, but before the initiation of the Day of the Lord. So there is still a 7-year time frame in view, but it's not labeled tribulation in its entirety. There is a recognized time frame known as the Great Tribulation, and the rapture cuts short the Great Tribulation, but doesn't cut short the entire persecution from Antichrist, but it does cut short what is a specific time period known as the Great Tribulation. Nevertheless, the rapture initiates a time frame that's labeled God's wrath, Day of the Lord, but also recognized as the second coming, the parousia. The rapture is that initiation event, that initiation activity that kicks off the second coming, which means in the Prewrath Rapture model, the second coming describes a series of events that spans the course of anywhere from 5 months to a year or so, but it involves activities of Yeshua doing different things for different people at different times, the rapture itself being that initiation activity, but the culmination of Yeshua's activities would be both the final salvation of national Israel near the end of that 7-year time frame, along with a battle against the Antichrist at Armageddon, probably a month later after the national salvation of Israel. And that would be that second arrow on the farthest right that you're seeing on your screen right now. So that's the Prewrath Rapture. All right, let's go to my study. What we're working from is, we originally started with this essay from gotquestions.org, and they hold to the pre-tribulation rapture perspective. And they reviewed and critiqued the other three views, and they assigned what they believe are strengths and weaknesses of each of those views. When they got to the Prewrath Rapture view, they believed that there were two primary weaknesses in the Prewrath view. And so when I scroll down into it, They say right here in this part, one of the weaknesses of the pre-wrath rapture is that we pre-wrathers presume that the elect mentioned in Matthew 24 are church-age saints. It is known that pre-tribbers, such as gotquestions.org, believes that the church will not be present during the 7-year tribulation time frame. Thus, since Jesus' words in Matthew, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke's Olivet Discourse readings is a description of events that take place during that 7-year time frame, at least that's according to most interpreters. So if you're preterist, you're probably saying, no, that doesn't take place then. But if you're futurists, like others are, I'm a futurist, we believe that the Olivet Discourse is describing largely future events. Although, don't get me wrong, there are some 70 AD events that are described, particularly in Luke. A lot of the language there matches up with pre-70 AD destruction language. Nevertheless, the pre-tribbers have the church absent from the Olivet Discourses. And thus, when Jesus mentions this word elect, the pre-tribbers must interpret that to mean national Israel or Jewish people who come to faith in Christ during that time frame. Something like that. Either way, they say it's the church. It's not the church. Well, we pre-wrathers, we do believe it's the church. We believe that the church is present during what they call the 7-year tribulation. Although, again, I do not subscribe to that label 7-year tribulation. I do subscribe to a 7-year period. And I do subscribe to tribulation times that are going to happen. I just don't overlap the two and automatically label the entire 7 years the 7-year tribulation. In fact, if I go back over to this slide, you can see that we pre-wrathers have a great tribulation, but this area that is normally called the tribulation, we label the beginning of sorrows. Will those sorrows be tribulation in nature? Yeah, they'll be troublesome. They'll be tribulational, if you can call it that, but there's no need to assign them the label tribulation as if God's doing that directly, even though God's Messiah is the one who cracks open those seals. This is also true. Again, I'll deal with all those details later on. Nevertheless, God Question says this is a weakness. The church is not the elect in the book of Matthew and Mark and Luke when it comes to talking about who's inside of the 7-year time frame. So that was one of their what they call is a weakness. And so I'm going to deal with that a little bit. The other flaw that they say of the pre-wrath position, they say another flaw in the pre-wrath rapture theory is it's teaching that the first seal judgments are not the wrath of God. So they kind of overlap there, and I'll talk about that a different time. But going back to the one where they say that the elect is not the church, we took time from pre-wrath perspective to refute that. As far as I can tell, I think it was a refutation. Perhaps it was just another assertion from their perspective. They're probably not convinced. That's fine. I say that's fine because Yeshua is the one that ultimately is going to come and rescue his bride, no matter if we're inside the tribulation or outside the tribulation. My faith is in his coming to establish his kingdom, and I'm going to be part of that kingdom because I place my faith in him, and he doesn't break his promises. I'm not going to park out on exactly when certain events are going to happen because sometimes details are missing. Like I said, information limitation. But when it comes to embracing who Yeshua is, who the true Messiah is, and the bigger program of establishing his kingdom here on earth, I hold that with a conviction, and I would fall on my sword for it. I would die for that. Absolutely. Take my head. I will not renounce that. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. So I created this document, and we just went through explaining why I believe the church actually is inside of this 7-year time frame. And I worked my way down to some excursus. One of them had to do with explaining that far from holding to a dispensational perspective, remember, dispensationalism, among other things, teaches that the church and Israel are two separate entities. I don't hold to that that detail of dispensationalism. I think it's weak. I think it has some holes in its logic. I think it doesn't have strong scriptural backing in certain areas. Instead, I believe that there is overlapping between the identity of the church in Israel at some points. So I hold to something that could be recognized as kind of what I call Venn diagram, and I'll show you some of these Venn diagram type explanations, but not right now. The point being is, in this section tonight, what we're going to look at is, in the second excursus, it's necessary to explain that the rapture of the church is a sort of first fruits event that's connected to the greater harvest of the salvation of national Israel. So rather than purporting like the pre-tribbers do that the rapture and the second coming are two separate events, as a pre-wrather, I see the rapture as the beginning of an event called the parousia, and that event called the parousia includes at the beginning stage or at the initiation event a rapture, but at near the end of it there is a national salvation of Israel. I'm not even calling it second coming really, because the whole parousia is the second coming, and the rapture is part of that second coming. And there's only one second coming. There aren't two second comings, or two or three, if you want to spin it that way. Functionally speaking, pre-tribbers are basically anticipating three second comings, or three comings of the Lord. So Excursus 2 is going to deal with the rapture gathering fulfills Israel's covenant calling and includes all who are in Messiah. We've already embarked on this. This is 2 weeks old now, meaning this is where we started this. And I worked our way through point 1, fulfillment of Israel's covenant calling. The rapture must include promises made to national Israel, because in Paul's theology, which is built on Tanakh theology, Abraham's family is not exclusively Jewish Israel. Abraham's family has swelled to include representatives from the nations who place their faith in Messiah, and thus they join Israel at the remnant level and become sons and daughters of Papa Abraham by faith in Messiah. And so we join the Commonwealth of Israel in that aspect. So we must see that we must teach, I believe, it's very important to teach that the rapture of the church is a trigger event that's connected and initiates a series of events that will eventuate in the salvation of national Israel. They are connected together because we're one people group. In the end, after Israel has been purged of her sins and embraces her Messiah, when the Spirit of grace pours over her and washes over her, she will embrace her Messiah. And at that point in time, Christians must accept the fact that it's one large family that we're looking at, Jews and Gentiles in Messiah, all recognizing Papa Abraham, right? Go back and read Galatians chapter 3 and Romans chapter 4 all over again. So point number 1 was fulfillment of Israel's covenant calling. Point number 2 was that the rapture includes all who are in Messiah, unify the elect. The rapture and I'm going to use the working title second coming, because that's what most Christians are used to hearing when they're trying to compare rapture versus salvation of Israel. They use second coming language when they describe salvation of Israel. So sometimes I'll say that, but that's basically what they're talking about. But again, my point is the two events must be connected in some way. The third point that we're ready to deal with now tonight is the covenant realization precedes wrath. So let's start there in our study tonight. Let me just read and let the commentary do the work for me, since I believe it's very self-explanatory. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to start off into this idea about the rapture kicks off a series of events that will lead to the salvation of Master Israel. But in order to appreciate how they are connected events, we're going to get a lot of mileage out of a test case from a passage in the Tanakh, because it's in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, that we find a lot of the solid promises given to Israel of old before there was this idea of what Gentiles being brought into the family might look like. When we read through the Old Testament Bible, many Christians are aware of the fact that a lot of the language has the church kind of concealed, because even the Messiah wasn't known yet to Israel, at least not openly by all. He was known to those who had eyes opened by faith to see, but the majority of Israel were reading their scriptures and they were blinded to this idea that there was a group of people that was going to come from a wild olive tree and be grafted together to their own family. So when we read through the Tanakh, it is entirely appropriate to understand first and foremost that these passages are describing events that would be witnessed and located within national Israel's people group. Don't play the supersessionist replacement card and believe that when you're reading the Old Testament word Israel, that somehow that you're reading the church there. So we're going to get this test case in a moment. We're going to do a case study on Isaiah 26:20. So covenant realization precedes wrath. You're going to have to follow along with me here, because these are things that are going to be a little bit difficult to understand unless you follow the breadcrumbs, follow the details. All right. I go on to say, these are my notes. The timing is important. This gathering happens after the tribulation. What gathering am I talking about? I'm talking about the rapture gathering, that gathering. It happens after the tribulation, but before the day of the Lord's wrath. Read Matthew 24:29 and 31, as well as Revelation 6:12 to 17, and Revelation 7:9 through 14. So this gathering happening after the great tribulation, but before the day of the Lord, is important because the salvation of Israel will happen closer to the end of the 70th week. This helps me see that the rapture event is not to be equated with the salvation of Israel at that moment, because of the after the great tribulation language and the before the day of the Lord's wrath timing. And we're going to find out later on that there's also some details given in the Tanakh about the sixth seal sign of the odd behavior of the cosmic bodies, such as the sun, the moon, and the stars, and things like that. But let's keep reading. This gathering represents God's act of covenant faithfulness, that is, delivering his people before judgment falls. So there's this big theme that shows up all across the Bible. God has his people, God will judge wickedness, but God either rescues or protects or seals, right? All kind of overlapping wording there. His people before he actually judges the unrighteous people. There's some significant activity that happens to God's people before this judgment happens on wickedness. And we see this in several different pictures across the Bible, going all the way back to the plagues of Egypt, right? We've got the Goshen principle, where God somehow supernaturally protected Israel in the midst of the plagues that were falling down all around them and destroying Egypt. And then God eventually snatched Israel out of Egypt before finally destroying the Pharaoh with the waters of the Red Sea crashing down on him. And Israel got saved, right? They were on the other side safe. So what we see in this grand picture as we look at these events is that God deals with his people in either a rescue manner or a protection manner before finally ultimately dealing with wickedness. That's one place we see that. We also have the example of, that was even before that, with Noah and the flood. You could say Noah was lifted to safety in the ark, but when before the floodwaters washed all the people away. That's one way of looking at it. You could also say that Noah was Noah was taken out of harm's way, and then the judgment fell. Or you could say that Noah was protected in the midst of the judgment. Both pictures are kind of in view, but when we get to Yeshua borrowing the Noah story and snapping it together with the story of Lot, both of them being in the book of Genesis, then it's better to view them as a rescue operation of God's people prior to judgment falling on the wicked people. Because in Lot's case, Lot is not preserved in the midst of Sodom and Gomorrah while fire and brimstone rain down on Sodom and Gomorrah. It doesn't work that way. Lot is actually physically removed outside of Sodom and Gomorrah to a safe place, and then the angels destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So in that picture, we definitely have rescue and then judgment. And since Yeshua mentions both of these events in his Olivet Discourses, I think it's better to see that same sequence when we come to Noah, that Noah was physically removed by using the ark, and then the floodwaters came and destroyed all the people. So we're building up to this picture that once again, in the end of days, I believe a future event is coming where there'll be this great persecution of God's people. We can call that the Great Tribulation. And during that time frame, the evil will be rearing its ugly head in the most heinous of ways. In fact, that time frame will be the worst time ever, according to many biblical authors, Yeshua being one of those authors. What's going to need to take place then is a rescue. God's people will once again find themselves at the center of persecution, at the being the prime target of evil and murder. We won't be the ones doing the murdering. We will be the ones being murdered. We're the victims. Well, God is going to rescue us. Will he protect us, or will he take us out of harm's way and then judge wicked? Well, we're going to have a little bit of both. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but just in case you're going to get lost with where I'm going. In terms of the church, we could say that God's going to snatch her out of harm's way and then begin to pour out judgment on the wicked parties that are on planet Earth at the time, namely the beast empire of Antichrist and all of those wicked followers of Antichrist who have been doing his bidding, persecuting Christians and things like that, and killing Jews. That's one form of God helping his people and offering a kind of salvation. But when it comes to national Israel, because a lot of them won't be in a position where they have embraced Yeshua just yet, then those who went in the rapture, that's the church. Those are they who have named the name of Messiah. But there will be a good number of national Israelites who are deliberating as to whether or not Jesus is Lord, but they haven't made that decision yet. But yet they don't want to embrace Antichrist either. They're in hiding. They will have run away during the midpoint of the week. At that point in time, they're going to need some protection. And so the rescue for them will come in the form of, I believe, shelter in place, protection, God protecting them from Antichrist activities. To some degree, there will be casualties, so not everybody gets protected. Antichrist does shatter the power of many of the holy people, and he does have his way with a lot of Jews and Christians. There will be many, many casualties. We don't all get protected. But all of those events will eventuate in this salvation of national Israel towards the end of the 70th week. Meaning out of that protection, they will meet their Lord and Savior, Yeshua. So let's read down through this. So God will deliver his people before judgment falls. That's the bigger theme I want you to see. 1 Thessalonians 1:10, Jesus delivers us from the wrath to come. Who's the us? It could be the church there. I think primarily that's who it is, first and foremost. But the Battle of Armageddon is also the final crushing blow to Antichrist and his beast empires. And the Battle of Armageddon, as far as I can tell, happens after the salvation of national Israel, not prior. So even in that model, we have deliverance first. Jesus saves national Israel, and then the Battle of Armageddon destroys Antichrist, meaning wrath to come happens. Although, again, we have to remember that wrath of God is including, from the pre-wrath model, includes both bowl judgments and trumpet judgments, but not seals themselves. Okay, Revelation 7:14, the great multitude came out of the great tribulation, having washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. Again, both of these passages, I believe, are primarily dealing with people who do name the name of Messiah. meaning we're talking about rapture events primarily. That's what the clearest rescue language in the apostolic scriptures seems to be pointing to. National Israel, by comparison, even though they're the bigger family that's in view, remember, church Christians or Gentiles are grafted into greater Israel at the remnant level. They don't become national Israelites, but they do become sons and daughters of Papa Abraham. Spiritual Israelites, if you want to call it that, that's fine. I'm okay with that label. But when we're reading through the Tanakh, that's where we're primarily trying to locate Israel's salvation at the national level. Remember, the church was a sort of a hidden mystery to the readers of the Tanakh, so they wouldn't have easily seen rapture of a church in the Tanakh. Although I think there are cases to be made where we could see details. Nevertheless, let's keep going. Revelation 7:14, I believe that's a rapture, a result of a rapture. It's not the actual rapture, but it's the result of the rapture. The great multitude that shows up is explicitly told to have come out of the Great Tribulation, with the article connected to the description of Great Tribulation, not just a Great Tribulation, but it's the Great Tribulation. And then we have Isaiah 26:20 and 21. God's people are hidden until the indignation is past. Now, this is where I'm going to start sewing together the rapture event with the salvation of national Israel to show you that there's harmony and connection and a thematic flow between the two events that connects them both into one second coming. So let me do this real quick. I need to pull up a slide here from previous. Notice they've got all four. I've got all four views of the rapture events. We've got the pre-trib rapture event over here on the upper left. We've got the mid-trib rapture here near the upper right. We've got the post-trib rapper. The post-trib rapper. That sounds kind of cool, right? Post-trib rapper. Yo, right? Post-trib rapper. The post-trib rapture in the lower left corner, and then we've got the pre-wrath rapture in the kind of lower right corner. And what you'll notice is that in the pre-trib version, let me blow it up a little so we can see it a little better. In the pre-trib version, with the rapture on the far end and the second coming at the other end, these events here are kind of disconnected from one another. That's why I put them as like kind of dotted lines there, you can see. These, I don't know if they're connected or disconnected there, right? Notice I'm not drawing a hard line between them because I'm not exactly sure how they articulate their rapture and their second coming. Are they disconnected? Are they connected? Mid-tribbers are a little hard to follow sometime. Definitely, though, when we get to the post-trib, they're definitely connected. They're on top of one another. They're the same thing. Second coming, rapture, they're just one event. That's what post-tribbers say, which, by the way, has some traction, right? I'm not completely throwing that one under the bus. But what I am going to do is begin to work from this idea that the pre-wrath rapture version has a rapture and then this arrow here that is pointing off to the right actually should be understood to be kind of this event down at the bottom of the, I'm trying to draw something down there. An event down there that we could call the salvation of national Israel. Maybe we can just draw an S, right? Wow, why did you do that? Right, so we'll just draw an S. This salvation of national Israel is connected to the rapture of the church. And so now I'm going to draw an arrow there like that. They are connected to each other. They're not disconnected. They're part of a greater event known as the second coming. And that's why the arrows are kind of connected the way that you see them in this chart.